series. And this next guy is certainly someone who is going to be at least in the RB 10 to 15 range debate, but is someone who has faced this heavy dose of skepticism due to the fact he's getting up there in age and is on a team that, while doesn't necessarily seem to be a fit for him, could offer a little intrigue in terms of how we view him production-wise. And that player is Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, after many years with the Tennessee Titans, where he was a force to be reckoned with, moves to the Baltimore Ravens, where they have been trying to find a running back who they can solidify as their RB1. They've always been a running back by committee approach kind of team. Now they have their guy who they expect to deliver for them in Derrick Henry. And throughout his career, Derrick Henry certainly has delivered. 1,657.5 fantasy points he has accrued throughout his entire career. His best season was in 2020. And I believe that was the season where he had his heroic 99-yard run, the stiff arms. A lot of memories from that season where he garnered 314.4 fantasy points in total. Now, the big question about Derrick Henry has always been his production and whether or not it's going to wane. But last year, in his age, I believe, 28 season, there was no signs of slowing down, much to some people's surprise, and it might surprise you as well. He was first in rush attempts, second in rush yards, 9th in explosive run rate, 11th in yards after contact, 11th and 14th in targets per route run, and respectively, he was 7th and 1st in yards per route run as well. So, ultimately, as you can see, Derrick Henry still has value. Now let's talk about how he fits on the Baltimore Ravens, because the Baltimore Ravens are definitely not going to be as over-reliant on him as the Tennessee Titans were. However, in hindsight, I do believe this is a fantastic pickup for this Ravens squad. For all the Ravens running backs throughout the years, whether it be a guy like Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell now, they always offer something very similar to what Lamar Jackson does. And Lamar Jackson is a very flashy runner of the football with his dual threat ability. And so, while Derrick Henry certainly seems like a weird fit in terms of his more physical style of play to counteract that, I see as the perfect foil to what John Harbaugh wants to do on offense with Lamar. And so, looking at how this opens up the Ravens' offense certainly is something to look out for in this upcoming season, because I feel like they moved more to the spread offense because I feel like Lamar trusted his wide receivers a lot more. And now that Derrick Henry adds that power at the running back level, I certainly feel like John Harbaugh is going to use him as kind of the bell cow of this offense. I don't think Derrick Henry, to put it kindly, is going to get the pretty yards. I think Derrick Henry is going to do much of the dirty work in this Baltimore Ravens system, because right now Baltimore is trying to find a way to get Lamar to be very effective as a thrower, and I feel like they really wanted a running back who can wear down opposing defenders and edge rushers especially, to A, protect Lamar, and B, ensure that he has the time necessary to get the ball down to his field to his nice little weapons that he has at his disposal. And so Derrick Henry, in terms of fantasy, that puts him in a weird place, because you might not like dirty work running backs. You want guys who can get you A, yards after contact, and B, most importantly, touchdowns and rushing yards. But Derrick Henry, especially in early downs, is going to see a lot of touches. And so I think that he adds a lot of value as an early down back, maybe as an RB2 in your lineup, maybe as someone you put in a flex position, where he can come off the bench on any given time and deliver the goods. And so I'm really intrigued for what this upcoming season is going to bring, and so too are some people who have given us projections for next year. He's projected to go for 1,182 yards, 11 touchdowns, 226 receiving yards out of the backfield, and 213.3 yards. And in those stats, I feel is the catch to Derrick Henry. I don't necessarily view Derrick Henry as a receiving running back, and that could sometimes hurt him, especially in early downs, where he's kind of looking to establish this level of dominance against opposing edge rushers. And so that's where I really think Derrick Henry doesn't necessarily fit the positional needs for Baltimore. I think that this deal means much more in terms of what they view in Derrick Henry's power than they do in Derrick Henry's receiving game. And so, especially if you're a PPR player or someone who really values guys who give you that level of receiving production at the running back position, Derrick Henry might be someone you want to shy away from. I think that Derrick Henry is always going to have that extra gear to him, but it's not going to come in the receiving game. I think that his screen action days are over. I don't necessarily see him running routes in the system because this one was all about opening up the offense to the best of its abilities. And in order to do that, Derrick Henry might have to do the gritty things that I was mentioning before. Now, how this affects the Ravens as a fantasy team. The Ravens have always been a fantasy team where you don't necessarily consider many people outside of Lamar. I don't necessarily think that's the case this year. Because of the fact Zay Flowers is looking like he's going to have a breakout year, Mark Andrews at the very least is at least a tight end 8, in my humble opinion. In terms of fantasy, I think that Mark Andrews has a lot of value to this offense. And so, I feel like Derrick Henry is going to be viewed very heavily in terms of the first couple of weeks. Derrick Henry might even be someone who a lot of people stream week to week. I think that that's where he can get a lot of value. Because Derrick Henry, to me, is not necessarily a starter, and he's kind of a borderline bench or utility option for me at the moment. And it's largely based on how I view his fantasy production to look like in this new setup. And so, I really hope that Derrick Henry can produce in the system, and it looks like he could. I think that Keaton Mitchell's still coming along, and they still have other options at the running back position, and they always have Lamar as kind of one of those RPO type quarterbacks. And so I think there's a lot of value in that running back and quarterback room in Baltimore, but it's all going to come down to how they play it. I think that, like I said, you probably aren't going to value Derrick Henry as your everyday running back as a fantasy manager. You're going to view him as someone who might be a nice little commodity in the waiver wire. He's definitely going to be someone who is going to see his name tossed about. I don't necessarily feel that he's a stable option, but he can make me look silly based on what Baltimore does with him, because he is one of their first stable name brands at the position. He is a name, not someone who is a committee guy. And so maybe that holds some weight amongst what people view of Derrick Henry, and maybe it doesn't. But at the end of the day, the Baltimore Ravens have a guy who, while seemingly is aging out of the league, and it is at the end of his rope in his running back career, so to speak, might still have a little bit of juice left within him. And it's up for the Baltimore Ravens to determine that, and you as fantasy managers to kind of cross the line with him. But that should just about do it for this specific segment of my fantasy player profiles. Coming up next, we have two good ones to close the show. In a wide receiver who's kind of in a weird place in a team that has very inconsistent questions at the QB position. And then, unfortunately, we're going to end on kind of a somber note as we talk about another running back who due to an injury he sustained similar to the one he sustained in college, might be at the end of his rope. You don't want to miss those segments. We'll be right back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast to talk more about them.